Welcome all. Today we are going to learn about another dimension of heredity or inheritance, which is expressed in the form of genetic disorders. We all know that we owe a lot to our parents in terms of our genetic makeup. This is what we call as inheritance. So we inherit our genetic makeup from our parents, and it is this genetic makeup which expresses itself in our appearance, in our mental abilities, and in our psychological characteristics as well. So, our intelligence, our personality characteristics are to a great extent how we are, both in terms of our physical body and the psychological makeup which we have, or the psychological being within us, is because of inheritance. Of course, we have also learned that we are what we are because of two major factors: genetic inheritance and environmental conditions. We have learned that environment also plays a major role in shaping how we think and how we behave. So, our mental processes and our behaviors are a result of what we have inherited from our parents in terms of genes and what we have got in terms of our environment. So, both our genes and the environment in which we grow up and exist influences the way we behave and the way we think. Or we can say that heredity and environment influences our mental processes as well as our behaviors. Now we'll understand in this lecture how genetic disorders are also inherited by children from their parents. So we learned in the last lesson that there are three types of genetic disorders. A genetic disorder is a disease that is caused by a change in an individual's DNA. So there is some kind of a change which happens in the individual's DNA, and because of this, genetic disorders happen. Genetic disorders are of three kinds: single gene disorder, which involve defects in one particular gene. Huntington's disease is one such disorder where there is an abnormality in just one gene within a person. Chromosome disorder is another disorder, which is a genetic disorder, another kind of genetic disorder, which results from changes in the number or structure of chromosomes. Down syndrome is an example of chromosome disorder where the person who is suffering from Down syndrome has an extra copy of the 21 chromosome. So instead of 2 chromosomes, the person with Down syndrome has 3 chromosomes. It is also known as Down syndrome is also known as trisomy 21 for the very reason that the 21st chromosome is in the form of 3 chromosomes and not a pair. We'll be learning in this lesson in detail about Huntington's disease and Down syndrome. The third kind of disorder, genetic disorder, is the multifactorial disorder, which involves multiple genes. So there are aberrations or abnormalities in multiple genes which result in certain disorders, which are called as multifactorial disorder. Example of a multifactorial disorder, genetic disorder, is cancer. Now let us go to Huntington's disease in detail. Huntington's disease, as we all know, is a single gene disorder which results because of a mutation in the HD, also known as HTT gene, on chromosome 4. So there is this mutation, or there is this aberration in the gene on the chromosome 4. Huntington's disease is a progressive neurodegenerative disorder. What does it mean? It means that it is a neurodegenerative disorder. It involves degeneration of the neurons within the brain, and it is progressive. Progressive means that the symptoms become worse as the time progresses. So as the time progresses, the individual who is suffering from Huntington's disease experiences a degeneration, a progressive degeneration, a consistent degeneration within the neurons. Huntington's disease develops usually in middle to late adult life. So the average age of onset of Huntington's disease is 35 years to 4 years. This disease involves both physical and psychological symptoms. So the person suffering from Huntington's disease suffers in physical body, has symptoms in his physical body as well as in the psychological functioning. The symptoms may vary from patient to patient. The symptoms of Huntington's disease are slight uncontrollable muscular movements, clumsiness, the posture becomes clumsy, the gait becomes the way the person stands or the way the person moves, walks, that becomes clumsy. There is loss of short term memory. So, short term memory is that memory which is very recent. We'll be learning about short term memory, long term memory in the chapter called memory in class 11. Just to give you an idea about what is short term memory, short term memory is that memory which is a very recent memory. When you look at something, it stays in your mind for a very short time. Unless you pay attention to it, unless you revise it, it just goes away from your mind. So short term memory is that store of information which expires very soon. Unless you pay attention to your information in the short term memory, it expires. We'll be learning in detail about short term memory when we go to chapter on memory. Then another symptom is that people suffering from Huntington's disease are suffer from inability to concentrate. They are not able to concentrate. They may have mood swings, they may have depression, which is a psychological disorder, and they may have uncharacteristic aggressive behavior. So it's a very unusual aggressive behavior which people suffering from Huntington's disease might indulge in. As we learned previously, Huntington's disease is a progressive disorder. It involves neurodegeneration, means that it involves degeneration of the brain. The neurons within the brain, they degenerate and the symptoms become severe with time. That's the reason we call Huntington's disease as a progressive disease. It progresses, it increases in severity with time. Now coming to treatment or management of Huntington's disease. Currently, there is no cure for Huntington's disease. Most of the genetic disorders are very difficult to cure. In fact, they have no treatment at all. We cannot do, once the person has inherited a genetic disorder, not much can be done in terms of treatment. But we can obviously manage. We can always manage the symptoms. We can always, using drugs, using various kinds of therapies, we can lessen the effect of the disorder. We can help the person be more effective, but we cannot treat genetic disorders. So there is no cure for Huntington's disease. The symptoms can be alleviated in a number of ways to improve quality of life. The symptoms can be reduced by using drugs. Drugs can be given to prevent involuntary movements and control mood swings and depression. So one can give medicines, one can take medicines for Huntington's disease in order to suppress the symptoms such as involuntary movements or mood swings or depression, but Huntington's disease cannot be treated. The symptoms, only the symptoms can be lessened. The severity of symptoms can be lessened. Speech therapy also helps in improving speech and ease in swallowing, and a well-balanced diet can prevent weight loss and may have a positive impact on other symptoms. So a healthy lifestyle, right amount of drugs, right kind of drugs, and therapies of all kinds, a good supportive environment, good supportive family members, they can help a person with Huntington's disease have less severity of symptoms, but Huntington's disease cannot be treated at all. Let us now understand another genetic disease which is called the Down syndrome. As we have learned, Down syndrome is a chromosome disorder because it results from an aberration in the chromosome of the person. So, person suffering from Down syndrome has an extra copy of chromosome 21. So, instead of a pair of chromosome 21, the person suffering from Down syndrome has 3 copies of chromosomes on 21 chromosome, and this is also called as trisomy 21. Down syndrome was first described in 1866 by John Langdon Down, hence the name Down syndrome. The major symptoms of Down syndrome are that individuals with Down syndrome tend to have mild to moderate intellectual disability. Now, people suffering from Down syndrome suffer from intellectual disability. They are low on IQ. You must have heard about the term IQ or intelligence quotient. So, when we measure intelligence, we call it intelligence quotient. So their measurement of intelligence is always on the lower side. They suffer from intellectual disability, moderate to mild intellectual disability. They also find sitting, standing, walking, talking, and reading very difficult during development. Children suffering from Down syndrome have their milestones. There are developmental milestones. As the child grows up, the child grows in terms of milestones. The development of the child can be observed in terms of milestones. For example, a child of 5-6 months has a major milestone of sitting. So, sitting is a milestone, running is a milestone, walking, standing, they are all milestones. Eating with the help of hands is a milestone. These are all milestones which help us identify whether the child is growing at the right pace or not. Children with Down syndrome have a delayed development, so all their milestones are reached at a later age than normal children of their age. So they achieve milestones, developmental milestones are achieved by Down syndrome people in a delayed manner. Their growth also, their physical growth also may be limited. And people with trisomy 21 or Down syndrome tend to have characteristic facial features. So if you look at a person who's suffering from Down syndrome, the person has very typical facial features which include slanting eyes, small ears, an open mouth with protruding tongue and a small nose. So they have a very peculiar facial expression and a very peculiar facial constitution. Let us now go to understanding how Down syndrome is managed or treated. As I told you, genetic disorders cannot be treated. There are no medicines to treat genetic disorders. We cannot do much once the genetic makeup has been done. But we can always use different methods to suppress the symptoms, to manage the symptoms so that their effect gets lessened. So, people with Down syndrome can lead relatively normal and successful lives. Though they are mentally deficient, intellectually deficient, still they are able to carry on with their lives somewhat smoothly. Children with Down syndrome often need special educational support and tend to reach developmental milestones later than unaffected children. So, with Down syndrome, the child needs special educational support. So, the child might be needing a special kind of school where the child is taught using special educational aids. So, the children with Down syndrome need a little bit extra, not a little bit, in fact, quite a lot of extra support from environment, from people around. Speech and physical therapy can assist children with Down syndrome to reach their full potential. So, all we can do to help the child with Down syndrome is by providing supportive environment, providing special education, special educators who are skilled to deal with, to educate children suffering from all kinds of developmental disorders. So, that is all about Huntington's disease and Down's syndrome. This also connects with what we had learned earlier, that genetic makeup and environment interact with each other. What this means is that a person, for example, if we take the example of Down syndrome, a person suffering from Down syndrome might be having severe form of a disability, but the environment which the person lives in which the child lives, that if that environment is supportive, if the child has good special educators, if the child has a good special school, if the child has supportive parents, then the effect of the genetic disorder can be lessened. On the contrary, children suffering from Down syndrome who do not have environmental support, not good schools, not well educated, aware parents who can take care of the child in terms of the special needs which they have. In that case, children suffering from Down syndrome, because of their genetic makeup, are not able to achieve their full potential. So, genes and environment, genetic makeup and environmental conditions, they interact. They There is always an influence on mental processes and behavior of both the genetic makeup and the environment. One might be having a very bright IQ, one might be very bright, intelligent, but if the child is not provided with a stimulating environment, then that brightness or that spark, that intellectual spark, does not find an expression. So, for one's intelligence to or intellectual ability to express itself, one also needs a lot of stimulation and inputs from the environment. If we were to take another example, consider a person who is average in intelligence but who has a very stimulating environment, a very stimulating, very supportive, very encouraging teachers, and a very supportive parents and other family members. Such a child will be able to fully achieve the limited intellectual ability that the child is gifted with. So, an average child, if given a stimulating environment, will do better than a child with bright intelligence but a dull environment. So, genetic makeup and the environmental conditions, they both impact and they both result in what we observe in terms of mental processes and behaviors. That is all for this topic on heredity and environmental influence on behavior. Now onwards, we'll be doing revision of the chapters. I'll be giving you certain keywords in written, and I'll be guiding you on how to write your questions in terms of what is expected of you in the annual examination. So I'll be giving you inputs from now onwards on how to write your assignments, as I've been doing it throughout. Now we'll be concentrating more on the writing part, and I'll be telling you how to go about writing keywords, how to attempt questions, 5-mark questions, and what kind of questions can be expected from chapter number 1. That is all for today. Thank you.